This Wednesday, October 29th, the American people and the world witnessed a moment that many believe is the definitive watershed for peace in the Middle East. What happened in the sands of Gaza was not just an incident. It was a direct test, a calculated provocation against the new era of stability forged by the sheer force of will of President Donald J. Trump. The architecture of peace, meticulously built by America, was attacked at its very foundation. The globalist elites and the swamp media were already preparing their headlines to declare American failure, salivating at the chance to see chaos return. They wanted the deal to collapse. They prayed for Trump's failure. But what they saw, to their absolute despair, was the demonstration of true American resolve, a force that does not retreat, does not bow, and does not abandon its allies. The day began with blood, but it ended with a reaffirmation of power that will echo for decades, proving that the era of American weakness is over. The tense silence of the ceasefire was cowardly broken. In Rafah, an Israeli soldier, a defender of the only democracy in that troubled region, was struck down. It was not an accident. It was a deliberate act of defiance, coming from the shadows where terrorism hides. Grenades and sniper fire. This is the language the enemies of freedom understand. They wanted to test the limits. They wanted to see if America, under Trump's leadership and its closest ally Israel, would blink. They thought they could kill a soldier and hide behind a piece of paper. They fundamentally underestimated the seismic shift that has taken place in Washington. The attack was not just on a soldier. It was an attack on sovereignty, an attack on the right to defend, and a direct attack on the credibility of President Trump. They poked the lion, expecting him to be the lamb the Washington establishment always was. What a catastrophic miscalculation. The response was not long in coming, and it was not proportional. It was biblical. Israel, exercising its inalienable and sovereign right of self-defense, a right vigorously defended by President Trump himself, responded with devastating force. The sky over Gaza lit up, over 100 dead according to local sources. The corrupt media immediately cried disproportionate, as they always do. They wept for the terrorists while conveniently forgetting the Israeli soldier cut down in cold blood. But this is the new doctrine. It is the doctrine of peace through strength. President Trump made it clear from day one, if you attack our allies, if you spill the blood of innocents, there will be no more blank checks from Washington. There will be retribution. Israel did what any sovereign nation would do. It eliminated the threat. And they did so knowing, for the first time in decades, that the White House would not stab them in the back. The instant the bombs fell, the Washington swamp and its media mouthpieces went into meltdown. The chorus of pessimists, of globalists who profit from perpetual war, declared the end. The ceasefire has disintegrated, they screamed. They ran to the microphones to blame Trump. They blamed Israel. They blamed strong rhetoric. They were ready to dance on the grave of the peace deal, a deal they never wanted in the first place, as it was achieved outside their corrupt bureaucratic channels. They saw their chance to drag America back into the Middle Eastern mire, to reverse the historic gains made by the Trump administration. For a few agonizing hours, it seemed the vultures would have their day. The world held its breath, watching to see if the old order, the order of weakness and apology, would return. They forgot who they were dealing with, but then the truth came to light. What happened on Wednesday morning was not a collapse. It was a recalibration. As soon as the dust settled, and the message was sent in no uncertain terms, both Hamas and Israel announced that they were, in fact, once again committed to the agreement. Think about what that means. Hamas, a terrorist organization attacked, was punished with overwhelming force, and instead of escalating, it backed down. They were forced back to the table. Why? Because President Trump, working with his team of patriots like Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, did not hesitate. They didn't send deep concerns. They sent a clear message. The United States is watching, and Israel has our full support. Hamas understood that the Obama era, the era of sending cash to terrorists, is over. The die was cast. Either they accepted peace on America's terms, or they would face annihilation. This was the second time the enemies of peace tried to sabotage the ceasefire since October 10th, and for the second time, they failed miserably. Just like in the previous clashes, where Israeli soldiers and Palestinian militants were killed. The escalation was contained in a matter of hours. What the media calls fragility, patriots call resilience. The agreement is not fragile. It is strong. It's a ceasefire forged in realism, not in globalist fantasies. It is an agreement that recognizes the nature of the enemy and applies relentless pressure. This new normal is not about instability. It's about constant vigilance. It's a ceasefire that can disappear in an instant, yes, but one that is restored just as quickly, not by Hamas's goodwill, but by fear of American and Israeli retaliation. President Trump has fundamentally changed the paradigm of negotiation. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, a man who understands the threat of radicalism, spoke the truth last week. It would not be a linear journey. He warned the American people there would be ups and downs. There would be twists and turns. Vice President J.D. Vance, a true patriot who understands the world as it is, not as leftist academics wish it were, echoed that sentiment, predicting little skirmishes here and there. They weren't being pessimistic. They were being realistic. They understood you can't just sign a paper with terrorists and expect them to become Boy Scouts. Peace is maintained by deterrence. And both men, like the president, remained optimistic. Why? Because they don't trust Hamas. They trust American strength. They trust the resolve of Donald J. Trump. Let's be absolutely clear about how this peace was achieved. It was not by chance. It was not a multilateral UN consensus. The agreement was imposed on the world by the sheer force of will of President Donald Trump. It was he who restrained Israel just enough to give diplomacy space. And it was his mediators who pressured Hamas to accept what they never wanted to accept, the reality that they cannot win. This agreement exists because of one word, Trump. And it will require the continued interest and firm hand of the United States to keep it intact. Especially now, as America leads the next phase. The hardest phase, creating an international force for Gaza, and most importantly, the complete and total disarmament of Hamas. The swamp says it's impossible. Trump says, watch. The chasm between what has been accomplished and what still needs to be achieved is vast. This is the source of the so-called fragility. The fighting has largely stopped. The living hostages have been handed over. Israel has pulled back to the yellow line, the first agreed-upon withdrawal position. The first phase is nearly complete. But now the world faces the real challenge, the second phase. The full withdrawal, the formal end of the war, and it is in this impasse, this dangerous limbo, that the true enemy reveals itself. While Israeli forces still occupy more than half of Gaza, an ancient, dark evil remains hidden beneath the surface, waiting for its chance to destroy everything that has been built. The corrupt system, both in Gaza and in Washington, depends on this impasse to survive. They don't want a final solution. They want a perpetual problem. The real danger, as experts on the ground warn, doesn't even come from the Hamas leadership, which has already been broken and forced to negotiate. The danger comes from the isolated cells, the remnants, those trapped in tunnels, outside the command and control of the organization. According to Mohammed Shahada, an expert monitoring Gaza, each of these hidden cells is a potential catastrophe. They are the true fanatics, left behind, without resources, without communication with their leaders, consumed only by hatred. They are the personification of terrorist ideology, pure chaos, disconnected from any strategy, motivated only by the desire to kill and die. This is the enemy President Trump and Israel are facing. Not a nation, but an ideology of death hidden underground. Think about the mindset of these isolated terrorists. No food, no connection. Hiding in the darkness. Shihada himself admits, the closer IDF, Israel Defense Forces vehicles, get to a tunnel or hideout of these isolated and disconnected militants, the higher the chances they will pop up in combat. They have a choice: starve to death in the tunnels like the rats they are, or go out in one last senseless act of violence. They prefer to die in combat than die of starvation or wait for the IDF to find them, Shihada said. This is the nature of the evil the leftist media refuses to name. There is no negotiating with this kind of fanaticism. There is no coexistence. There can only be eradication. And that is exactly what the Trump-Israel alliance is prepared to do.
Hamas itself was forced to admit its own impotence. After the first major ceasefire violation on October 19th, the terrorist organization issued a statement admitting that contact with the remnants of our groups in areas like Rafah had been cut. They don't even know how many are still alive. They have no control over their own forces. These are not rogue troops. They are, as Shihada said, literal time bombs. They are the entropy of terror, and every attack they launch is not an act of war. It is a desperate act of suicide, designed to drag the world back into the total conflict their masters have already lost. They are the last gasp of a failed movement, and the Trump administration understands they must be treated as such, with decisive force. Amidst this turmoil, as the media panicked, the commander-in-chief was calm. Aboard Air Force One, President Donald Trump spoke with the moral clarity that has been missing from Washington for decades. Regarding the attack on the Israeli soldier, he was blunt. My understanding is they killed an Israeli soldier. And on the retaliation, so the Israelis struck back, and they must strike back. When that happens, they must strike back. What a contrast to the weak leaders of the past, who would have condemned both sides. Trump understands there is no moral equivalence between a sovereign army defending its border and a terrorist organization attacking from the shadows. He reaffirmed Israel's right to self-defense not as a concession, but as a moral imperative. Then President Trump sent a message not just to Hamas, but to the entire globalist establishment that doubted him. Nothing's going to jeopardize the ceasefire, he declared. That was not a request. It was an order. It was the President of the United States telling the world that the peace he negotiated will hold, because the alternative is unacceptable. He then laid out the unvarnished truth that CNN and the New York Times refused to print. You have to understand, Hamas represents a very small portion of peace in the Middle East, and they have to behave. He diminished them. He exposed them as the small gang of fanatics they truly are, a pebble in the road to the regional prosperity he is building. He is not negotiating with them as equals. He is dictating the terms of their surrender. And then President Trump delivered the final ultimatum, the words that made the system tremble. If they're Hamas good, they'll be happy, and if they're not good, they will be eliminated. Their lives will be snuffed out. Read that again. This is the language of strength. This is the language that tyrants and terrorists understand. The days of secret cash payments in the dead of night are over. The days of apologies are over. The new American doctrine is simple. Cooperate with civilization and live in peace, or resist civilization and be destroyed. President Trump has drawn a line in the sand. He has given Hamas a binary choice. The world has not seen this kind of moral and strategic clarity from an American president in generations. The battle for freedom has a leader again. Military analysts in Israel, like Yoav Limor of Israel Hayom, understand the reality. They know that Hamas will remain Hamas. They know the movement has not changed its nature. Anyone who believes something has changed doesn't understand the movement or the nature of the region, Limor said. This is precisely why Trump's approach is the only one that can work. Limor states that more conflict is inevitable unless Washington pushes forward. What does that mean? It means the pressure cannot let up. It means moving to the next phase, working to remove Hamas from power permanently. If America falters, if Trump's resolve is replaced by establishment weakness, the situation could deteriorate. The world cannot afford to go back. America is not faltering. The United States has sent a series of high-level officials, patriots dedicated to the president's vision, to monitor the ceasefire and begin building the mechanisms for the future. Humanitarian aid, reconstruction, but not in the old corrupt UN way which only funded more terror tunnels. This will be a reconstruction under American oversight, ensuring every dollar goes to the people, not the terrorists. The U.S. is determined to keep the process moving forward, even if progress is gradual. The swamp wants speed and spectacle. Trump wants victory and stability. He understands that true peace is built brick by brick, and the first brick is always security. Israel, our ally, is preparing for an election year. Prime Minister Netanyahu will be cautious about resuming a full-scale war. Hamas, weakened and broken, also seeks a period of calm to try and recover. It is precisely in this moment of pause that American leadership is most crucial. The familiar pattern of violence and response will only be broken by real progress on the plan's toughest conditions. And now we see the power of Trump's diplomacy at work. Even the Prime Minister of Qatar, a country that has historically funded Hamas, admitted on Wednesday that Doha is trying to pressure them to get to a point where they recognize they need to disarm. Trump's pressure is working. The world is falling in line. The Qatari Prime Minister went even further, saying Hamas needs to be ready to move to the next phase, and that a Palestinian agency that is capable of being the sole holder of weapons must be created. This is Trump's vision becoming reality. The disarmament of Hamas, the end of the terrorist monopoly on Palestinian life. This is about creating a real political horizon, ensuring the safety of Israelis and Palestinians. If this cannot be done, if the American will falters, both peoples will remain in limbo, trapped in a fragile truce with no real peace and no long-term prospects. The establishment wants limbo. President Trump demands a solution. Music swells to a dramatic and inspiring crescendo. What we witnessed today was not the failure of peace. It was the demonstration of how true peace is kept. It is not with paper. It is with power. It is not with trust. It is with deterrence. President Donald Trump once again has proven his instincts correct and his critics wrong. America is at a turning point and the world is watching. The system may try to resist, the terrorists may hide in their tunnels, and the corrupt media may scream their lies. But the truth has already been exposed. American leadership is back, sovereignty is being respected, and the fate of freedom in the Middle East is, once again, being secured not by luck, but by the strength and unwavering will of the United States of America. History will exact a price from those who tried to manipulate the nation's destiny.